Good evening, and welcome to another episode of the Social Z Franchise Happy Hour. I'm the host, as usual, Calvin Smith. Today I'm working in my Sign Aroma franchise here in beautiful Destin, Florida. It's a little cold outside, but not too bad. Got a young entrepreneur joining us from the great state of California. Ash, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome, awesome. So I asked how we usually kick these things off is we'll ask you to give us a quick 60-second, 120-second intro just about who you are, where you are, what your brand is, and anything else that you feel is important.
Sure. So my name is Ash. I got into the franchise game when I was 26 years old. I'm actually a first generation immigrant to the States. Both my parents were from Iran. And I was born in 1993 in Woodland Hills, stationed in Ventura County. Went to UCSB for pre-med. Didn't get into medical school and ended up selling pizzas. So that's the short end of it.
Awesome, awesome. So a lot to dive in that first 30 seconds there,
Yeah.
Ash. So thanks for sharing some points there. So let's talk about the early part. So
Yeah.
first generation immigrant. How old were you when you immigrated from Iran? What was that like? How was your early years? Did you know English? Like help us understand that.
No, so funny enough, I was born in Woodland Hills. I was supposed to be born in Tehran, the capital of Iran, but we just kind of moved in here and there. And I born in Woodland Hills. Didn't know English up until I was about 5 years old. And there's always stories of my parents reminiscing of me yelling at the neighbor kids in Farsi, thinking they could understand me, and I would just be dumbfounded, thinking, why don't they understand what I'm saying? So went to school, figured out, oh no, this isn't the common language. I'm speaking Elven to these guys, and went from there. But yeah, no, it's great. It's great having a dual background and seeing things in different perspectives.
Absolutely. What brought your folks to the States? Like, what was the situation there that brought them to California?
So my dad actually immigrated before the Shah of Iran was ousted by the current regime, right? So he came beforehand, but he originally came to get his education and he pursued a master's in engineering, right? He was trying to get his engineering degree. And they were thinking about going back, but then everything in Iran just kind of got a little bit turbulent. Decided to stay in Florida, and he was actually going to make a coin toss to go either to New York or California, and just so happened to landed where it did, and we ended up in Ventura County. So that was the first way we went to, and then we just kind of, expanded from there. But that was the short answer of it. Yeah.
Sure, sure. And obviously, your education was important to your father. I imagine it's to your mom as well. What was education like? Learning English at 5. Maybe feeling like you're a little different than your peers, things like that. How was your education coming up, being a first generation immigrant? And did your parents really push that traditional? Get a specialty degree, get a good solid job. Like, what was the plan there?
Yeah. So, when you're a kid, you really don't know if you have any other shortcomings or any forthcomings compared to like your peers, right? You're just kind of plopped into it and you're just running around. You're a sponge, right? So thankfully for me, I picked up on the language pretty quickly. I think I speak English decently. I could slur and get a couple things wrong here and there, but no, definitely Farsi was my first language. Learned how to read and write it. Now I forget how to read and write. I just speak and understand it. But English definitely. And my parents, as far as a traditionalist background, it's interesting. My father comes from a heavily educated background himself. My grandfather was a historian himself, having his, degree in engineering. Mom, not so much. Mom, more so street knowledge. But ultimately, I know the whole stereotype of foreign families and parents is, they really want you to get your education. You either become a doctor, lawyer, and engineer, and those things, and you go out and you get a job, and 60 years old, you retire and you die. you know? But for me, it was more so just what do you want to do? I was very fortunate in the sense that my dad kind of got into the entrepreneurial game when he was young, when I was basically born. And that was all I've ever known. And I think when I was young, gosh, maybe a year even before I was born, he quit his job and started his first franchise with Orange Julius back when they were still around inside the malls. So when I was born, instead of going to like a daycare or the house, my parents would bring me and put me in a crib in the back of the Orange Julius. And that's basically where I was brought up.
Awesome, awesome. So you grew up in California. Obviously, sounds like you did well enough in school to go to pre-med. And then what changed? I mean, what happened in those years where you're like, okay, I'm no longer going to, spend the next, 8 years of my life going to med school. I'm now going to go get into franchising. Like, what was the trigger there?
So partially because I didn't get in. That's one of it. Let's just be real. Um, it makes a difference. But what ended up happening was, so I went to JC. I wanted to save a lot of money. I had the grades to go into a 4-year college immediately, but it just didn't make sense to me financially. Told my parents, they said, fine, don't worry about it. We don't care about the name, just as long as you're happy, get your education. At the end of the day, where'd you graduate from, where'd you get your BS or BA, that's what it is. They don't look at your JC. Got into UCSB as a biochem major under the chemistry department. Took a full year of biochem, organic chemistry, genetics, linear algebra, all the way past calc and all that jazz. And during my last year at UCSB, what ended up happening was I got really big into fitness, and don't look at me now, I'm like a shell of what I was. But I used to do a lot of meal prepping. And for anyone who's got a lab in college, they would know that labs tend to take like 4 to 5 to 6 hours, right? And you'd have to be there to make sure whatever you're running is going to go from start to completion, right? And you have to monitor what's going to happen. So I used to bring in these meals, and obviously, it was home cooked, much better than whatever you could bring in back at the time. I don't even think our campus would allow outside food to be brought into a lab. You would have to like make it yourself. It was some weird rule. But anyway, I would make salmon, steak, shrimps, different items, bring it with either quinoa, brown rice, white rice, some carbs, some veggies, and have it in a little bento box. And I would do that for about 2, 3 months. And eventually, some of the classmates were like, hey, Ash, can you bring us some? I said, okay, well, I'm making it anyway. I'll bring you another one. And then more said so. Okay, let's bring it. And then eventually the TA said it. So now I'm like, okay, well, I'm bringing 6, 7, 8 meals for these people. Why don't I just start selling it? So started selling it. One of the kids in the class said there was a program in UCSB called TMP, and it stood for Technology Management Program. They said, hey, you seem like you'd be a great fit for this. Why don't you go and apply for the class? Applied, didn't get in, said, screw it, I'm just going to crash it. Whether you like it or not, I'm going to be here. And went in and essentially started my first little startup. And it was called Hotbox Meals. And it would be myself and my roommate. We would cook meals up until 2, 3 a.m. and just bike around campus and IV and all that, and just deliver meals for, at now it's so crazy to me, but like $5, $7 at a time. We'd go to Costco, get a crazy run, get a crazy haul, cook it all, and then go. And partially the reason why I didn't get to med school was because I'd be up so late making these meals. I just didn't care about my classes anymore because I was doing a little business. So I just forgoed that, still passed my classes. GPA was at like a 3.2 or something, which isn't competitive for med school. Really focusing on the TMP thing, got in there, started pitching, pivoting, figuring out who my customer is, getting my MVP, wireframing like an app, a website, all that jazz, and getting it all going. And got into a competition for, again, technology, who's got the best app, who's doing this, who's doing that, what's the new great thing. Ended up getting like fifth place out of 30 people, all with technology, and I was the only guy with food. I was there in the middle of an auditorium with a plug-in skillet making chicken, and some guys out there pitching a new wave of solar technology. And I'm like, okay, well, this is what we're doing.
Yeah, Ash. So I've seen these competitions before. I did, when I was in grad school as well. I did some of those. Were you the only one that had an actual viable business at this point, like in that?
I had an MVP. I was cash flow positive. At that point, we had sold close because eventually we had pivoted to our target audience wasn't college students, it was gym goers at high-end gyms, so like high-end Golds, Equinox, and it would be a 50 to 65 age group where we would sell the meals in a cold or like a heated box or something, right? So like an element. People will come, and as a benefit to being a member to that gym, they would be able to pick it up for like $15. And it was just a hit, people are that age, they had the money, didn't have the time, and just it was a perfect marriage. And I actually got funded by an angel. And he said, hey, he was my mentor. He's 30 grand, 30, 40 grand, whatever it was. Go find a kitchen, go lease it out, go run with it. I was about to do it, and every single member of my party said, you know what, we're going to go our own different ways. And it was just me and a check. Got scared, didn't do it, and kind of bumbled along, and yeah.
What an amazing story. So you built your first viable business while going to school, and then got VC funded technically, or angel funded at minimum, right? After that, that's amazing. So you're out doing this. You decide not to go to med school. What are your parents saying? Are they getting nervous and like, hey, Ash, we need to do something else, or was your dad being an entrepreneur? Was he excited about it?
It's funny. So my mentor, the same guy who gave me the original angel investment fund, and mind you, I come from a very fortunate background too. Like we've had 25 years of franchise experience, many multiple businesses, and so I come from a more well-off platform. But he told me, he's like, you know what, Ash, go and do whatever you can and fail. There's no obligation for you. Your risk is very minimal. And at the end of the day, if everything hits the fan, what's the worst case? You go back to your parents' $1 million home and you start over again? What's there to lose? Right? But my dad just basically said, you know what? Try to go get some sort of degree. So I had my degree. I got a job actually out of college selling medical equipment just because of my background. That didn't go so well just because I don't know if you know or any of your friends, typically people who are very entrepreneurial minded are very usually bullheaded in their way of thinking. So when I got into this company, and this is again naivety speaking, but I was the one directing, hey, you need to do this. This is the kind of like cold call sheet we should be getting. This is the intro. These are the people we should be targeting. So I lasted about 4 or 5 months and didn't go so well, but they were never really worried because I was always doing something in the background. And whether it be helping my parents with their businesses or, managing the properties that they had, I was always doing something. So I was never with my hands, under my butt and just doing nothing. But I think in the back of their mind, obviously, I'm sure every parent has a worry, but thankfully, knock on wood, not so much for mine.
So you transition out of that. You're coming out of college, had a viable business that your partners decided to leave you there with. What were the next few years like? To go from there to, hey, now I'm gonna look at franchising. Was it because your father had done it? Was it just how did you get to that point?
So 22 to about 25. Pretty depressed, mostly because my entire life I had thought I was going to med school, right? So I had an extensive record of working in a hospital, volunteer hours, had my pharmaceutical technician's license, had my phlebotomist license, worked in labs, did everything. And that's what I really thought, you know, and surrounding myself with other doctors and other people my age going to this professional route. So coming out of it, it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. Like, oh, I'm not doing this. I'm doing my own path, right? It was pretty bad. But I had a girlfriend, now wife at the time, who she had finished her master's in education and she was teaching in Pasadena. So my goal was to go find some job around the area to where we could be together and I could just sustain myself for a little bit. And the goal was let me get a job, save up a little nest egg, become a general contractor, use my dad's brokerage license, and start flipping real estate. After the medical job, found another company called ATI. It was like American Technologies Institute, whatever. They did a lot of project remediation. So any fire, water, earthquake, any damage like that, they would send a project manager out, a coordinator, an estimator, whoever. They'd bid the job, come back, and if they wanted it, you'd go in with your team and you'd fix it up. Did that for about 2 months, got fired also as well, was working on a job site for Pierce Brosnan, the original GoldenEye 007. And it was a 5-day job. The third day into it, I got called up by the branch president, wrote me my last check. It said, company and you are going different directions. Here you go. Goodbye. At that same time, my dad had fully retired from the business and everything, but he was still getting a lot of, brokers reaching out to him about new businesses being sold or opportunities, whatever. And he had contacted me about Jamba Juice. And there was 5 corporate Jamba Juices for sale in the Ventura County area. Well, one in Santa Barbara, four in Ventura, that they were going to dump, and they wanted people with multi-unit operation experience. So they reached out to him. He was local in the area. Most of his questions was in Ventura, Oxnard, Thousand Oaks. And he said, "Hey, Ash, do you want to look into this and think about it?" So I had ran a couple of his stores before, back when I was in early JC, a little bit in high school too. And we looked at the P&Ls, spent about a year doing our DD on all 5 of these stores. I mean, it was extensive to the penny. We knew everything. Jamba at that time, formerly Jamba, basically wanted us to buy those 5 stores for cheap. We got them down to like $550,000. It was nothing, nothing. And the only contingency they wanted is that they wanted us to also sign a 5-unit development within the next 3 years after we had purchased the 5. And we said, no, the 5 stores that are running right now, they're not doing well. Year over year, they were losing 4 to 6%. We're like, okay, well, to just beat inflation, you have to be at least in the 3 to 5s. So we said, no, we got to come back to it, just kept running our rounds. And we were getting close to a deal. Then Jamba got bought out. The entire company got bought out by Focus Brands, the same guys who own Carval, Cinnabon, and all those guys. Bought out. The brokers who were leading that deal, gone. Everyone who was with that company, gone. They moved the company, I think, to Texas or something like that, Texas or Atlanta. And new company said, okay, let's start from scratch. And I was pissed. So I said, look, I spent a year not working, just doing my DD on this, trying to figure it out. We have the money sitting. Let's just figure out something to do. My dad had another contact with a broker from a long, long time ago. He said, hey, Eddie, there's a store in Temecula for sale called Marco's Pizza. I said, Marco's Pizza, what is that? So he goes down, tries it. Product was good. I had never been to the store before we bought it. Buys the store at the time. I put $100,000 in. My dad put $100,000 as like seed, right, to help me out. Buys a store, drives me in, and I look around. I'm like, where the heck am I? What is this place? It was a one street, city basically. I'm like, dude, what did you get me into, man? I'm gonna uproot my life, come down here, take my girlfriend, come down. I don't know what I'm doing. And I just said, you know what? It's got okay numbers. I think I can run it. I've never thrown a pizza. Didn't know anything. Got into it, knock on wood, it was probably one of the best decisions we kind of got into, because every other business we had looked into beforehand, whether it was an IHOP, Jamba Juice, Breakfast Cat, like anything, almost failed unanimously, except for pizza. So someone's looking out for me.
Absolutely. Well, that's a crazy interesting path there, Ash. So you buy the Marcos. You know, what's your thoughts, or what was your thoughts at the time on the brand? What made you excited about the opportunity once you figured out that you were in it? And how many Marcos are there in the United States? Where do you see your opportunity going with the brand? And talk through that story a little bit.
So Marco's, I believe, just finally hit their 1,000 store milestone as of late. So they're on track to being $1 billion brand. I want to say they're number 5 in the pizza segment. It's Domino's, Pizza Hut, Papa John's, Little Caesars, and then Marco's. And I think they're either budding for those. It's one of those 3 at the bottom. So they're definitely up and coming brand. It's got a great origin story, authentic Italian roots, started in Ohio and just grew the business with him and his family. And I think Pat Giamarco is the original founder of Marco's. His daughters still run some of the original stores. So it's really cool to see. It's really cool to see. But I mean, now he's still, I want to say, an owner, a partner of a couple of the stores, and they sold it to another guy, and there is another CEO running it. But as far as me coming into it, so typically with a franchise, Marco's, they had, I believe memory serves right, they had a 6-week training period in Ohio. And I didn't know anything about pizza. I only know how to make sandwiches from Quiznos, right? So you go in, they train you for a couple days. They send you to a certified training store for 6 weeks. You get trained there from A to Z, how to make a pizza, how to do your inventory, how to talk to customers, everything. And then once you're good and ready, they'll send you to your own store. Whether you're building a new one or you're buying one pre-existing like me, that's how they do it. And you still have support afterwards, much like hopefully your franchise as well. You know, you can call someone, hey, I need help. But as far as the brand goes, they don't know much. I think right now, still, I have differing opinions. And if you talk to anyone at corporate, I've made a name for myself too, just being loud in my little corner of the world. But I think it's a great brand. I think it's got a great product. They're going places, but me being young and coming from a different perspective, when your typical franchisees, at least in their mid to late 30s, getting into it, um, I have some different ways, especially if a brand is trying to target millennials and Gen Z, and I'm thinking, okay, well, I'm early millennial, late Gen Z. If you're trying to target me, I feel like I should be a point of reference. But again, that's partially it's an ego talk. Partially it's an ego talk.
Absolutely. So you started with the one location, and what was the decision and the thought process about opening your second one, and then where do you see it going? I mean, is this a 10 unit opportunity? I mean, what are you thinking?
So in the short term right now, I try to keep my goals to a more realistic and tangible number, because I've met a lot of people who are like, I got one, two, three Togos or Flame Broilers or whatever, Denny's, Domino's, and they're like, we're gonna get to 20. And they get to 10, which is still a very respectable number, but they're disappointed in themselves because they couldn't get to that larger number. So for me, for now, I want to get to five, right? My goal is to get to five, hopefully when I'm 31, 32, right? And from there, I kind of want to diversify the portfolio into either another QSR or a different business to where I can pay my employees a minimum of 52,000, right? Because one of the tribulations that I've seen with food is that it's so hard on the employees, especially if you have good employees and they're working 30 hours a week and you really want to care for them, you really want to see them grow, but your margins as a QSR business are so tight, especially with the pandemic right now and food costs is going absolutely insane. It doesn't make sense for that business model anymore. I mean, like, to put into perspective, when I first got into this, and mind you, we've gotten more sales, but when I first got into this business, I think my first shipment was like $4,500, right, for everything. Now I'm looking at a shipment of close to $9,000, right? And though my sales have gone up, my sales haven't doubled, but it's like it's insane, And the thing is too, all I've known is COVID. I mean, I bought the operations in October, and then March is when just everything started, and this is all I've known. So anytime I go and I try to schedule people for, the past, hey, what's our 2017, 18 looking like? How can I do it? What's sales going to look like? What are peak hours? Throw it out the window. Nothing makes sense. So
That's a cool opportunity. It seems like you've got a good idea of where you want to be, Ash, and five stores. You're this young. I mean, you say 31, but it sounds like with your background and your ambition that they could be talking in 2 years. Like, hey, I've got 7 stores. So yeah, that's awesome. So a couple questions I like to ask everybody, and you know your background is interesting to lean into this, but what were the one or two things once you opened your doors in the franchise specifically? I know you had your previous businesses, but in the franchise specifically, what are the one or two things where you're like, oh man, I'm really not good at this?
following rules. So, it was funny. I feel like a franchise should have some flexibility depending on who their franchisee is and with trust. Now, granted, I'm playing devil's advocate because this is the role I have. But for example, if I ever wanted to say, hey, if you guys, and this is just my example, have a large carry-out pizza on Friday nights, Saturday nights, let me give you a free 2 pint of Ben and Jerry's, right? Even though it's not a corporate approved item, I can source it myself, I can get it. I'm not selling it, it's free. Here you go. Still not approved, right? Sometimes it's like, hey, I think that this new item is easier for us to make. The profit margins are really high. It's a quick throw it in the oven, whether it be cinnamon sticks or something else, like a jalapeno popper, right? It usually comes pre-made. Let's do it. Can't do that either. right? Or for a franchise, when you are a franchisee, you are representative of the entire brand, right? So if you want to do something that's completely off the wall and you don't know if it's going to do well or poorly for you, right? It ultimately reflects on everyone. So those are the type of risks I would still like to take because my obligation is basically myself and my wife. And, if the roof over my head gets repoed or something happens, we can always go back and do something. But I know for a lot of the other more well-established people, it's like, hey, man, you really got to pump the brakes and calculate what are you doing? What's the risk versus return? And, you have to, those things have to really make sense for you. But it's a byproduct of being so young and not really having much to lose, if that makes sense.
Absolutely, absolutely. It gives you a unique perspective, as you said, and you probably understand your customer base better than someone who bought this after they retired from their corporate job or something like that. So there's a give and take there, and from in my experience, Ash, the franchisors that allow you a little bit of freedom while keeping it in the box, so to speak. That's how the brand grows and how everyone gets and is using that brand. Absolutely. Last question for you, Ash. How are you balancing your personal life? Running a business is a 24/7 job and then some. You know, what are you doing to make sure that you keep yourself and your mental health, your personal well being, all that in shape? Plus, the relationship with your wife, your family. What's your day to day like, and what are you doing well at, and what are the things that you realize, hey, I can work on this?
So another kind of benefit and con to being so young in the business is that I feel as though I'm very easily related to my employees, right? I mean, the median age of my employees is 21, 22 years old. And when I first took over the business, there was an issue of authority, right? For example, people just not leading or not listening is like, hey, you're only 26 at the time. You're thinking you can tell me around. And that was an interesting thing that I learned. But at the beginning of the store, and I would hope for everyone getting into a new business, especially a franchise, right, that they would try to be there as much as they can. And for me, because I didn't know too much about the pizza game, I wasn't too seasoned on it. I wanted to be there and I wanted to learn because my perspective of it as an owner is if I cannot do everything A to Z in the store, how can I expect my employee to do the same thing, right? Whether it be cleaning out the drains, toilets, repurposing shelves, anything. Whether, figuring out the POS. If I can't do it, then I can't hold my manager or my lowest employee responsible for the same things. So for the first couple months, I was there open to close, trying to make sure every penny was accounted for, making sure all my customers were good. And slowly, as I got more comfortable and as the employees knew who I was, I let it go more and more and more. So I would take my Mondays and Tuesdays off, then Wednesdays, eventually Thursdays. Now I'm actually transitioning to taking the whole thing off and I'll pop in randomly. So for the past 2 weeks, I haven't been in there and it's just been stressful for me because I'm constantly looking on the monitors to make sure they're good. And I care for my guys because I don't want them to get stressed out either. I'm like, hey, I can come and help. I feel like I'm worth 2 to 3 people and I don't want to see you struggle. But the pitfall is my dad, when he had Quiznos, he had at the peak 9 Quiznos, right? And he had something close to like 200 employees and X amount of general managers and all that stuff. And he was incredibly beholden to his stores, right? And I remember when I was younger, every time I would have a soccer game, a theater play, whatever event, he would never be there. And, it always got to me. So my thing was, if I could figure out how to get these things as turnkey as possible, right? With the exception of, that if you're not there with 100% service and 100%, eye to food costs and the employees lacking off and all that stuff, it's not going to run as well. But it will allow you to grow if you're allowing your employees the room, right? And you need to make sure your employees know that you're not there just to collect a check at the end of the day. You're there to make sure that whatever mistakes they make, they own up to that and they learn from it. Because your job is just supposed to be a stepping stone for them to go on to do better and better things, right? But you're usually that first stepping stone, especially in the QSR space, right? That's how it was for me when I was growing up. I didn't know how to mop. I didn't know how to talk to customers or sell anything. But those are the fundamental skills you learn. And you, as an owner, now me, have to make sure that whatever mistakes you make, whatever, you're there to help them out. You're just not there to collect the check, cash it, and go. Because if you do, which a lot of people I know do it, you will fail really quick and you're just going to become another statistic. And that's why they always say food is always hard to run because they just think it's turnkey.
Sure, sure. Well, that's awesome. Well, it sounds like, and unfortunate that your father was not able to, be involved in a lot of stuff when you were younger. But it sounds like that you've learned from that, and you're starting with the end in mind. So, years down the road when you start to build your family and things like that, you're not, missing out on those opportunities. So,
Yeah. That's the goal. That's the goal. I mean, granted, today I was in El Cajon, 2 hours away from my store. And one of my employees didn't wake up to open it, and we already had pizzas getting ready. And I'm like, get your shit together. We need to get there now. So, you see me going 90, 100 miles down the freeway trying to get there. So those things happen. It's not that I'm just sitting in La La Land and I'm free.
Ash, man, it's been a pleasure. Thanks so much for sharing your story, and very cool and very unique, and well done for you, and building so early and so young, kind of the foundation for something that's going to be really cool. So
I appreciate it.
thanks for taking the
Yeah.
time to talk with us, and we hope to talk to you again in a couple years.
Yeah, man. Hope to see you once every year and see what happens. And I hope you guys grow
Yeah,
on your podcast too, man.
absolutely. Thanks, Ash. Have a good evening.
You got it. You too.